if you want to have a healthy organization, I could say you need to start with yourself and the kind of person you are. I'm not going to talk a lot about that right now. We can come back to it later. But I would say this. You will not have a healthy organization if you do not clarify your mission and vision. You have to know your purpose. Why are you here? What are you trying to do? And how will you know when you get there? You may have heard the story about Alice in Wonderland, and she came to the fork in the road, and there was the cat smiling. And Alice said to the cat, which road do I take? And the cat said, well, where do you want to go? She said, I'm not sure. He said, then it won't matter. And that's the way it is. And that's why I say we start here, because you really have to know the why. Why are we here? What are we trying to accomplish? Do we know what it will look like when we get there? You have to be able to explain that so that everyone understands it and they agree on it. And here, I'm going to talk this afternoon primarily about the board and about the staff. And of course, the place you want to begin with is the board, because they're responsible for overseeing, reviewing, and controlling the work of the organization. So if they don't know it, it will be an accident if it happens. So you begin with the board and say, we need to be sure they clearly understand what the mission and vision are. There's no doubt about it, and how we're going to try to accomplish that. That becomes an essential element in both recruiting your board and your staff. Because ultimately, you say everyone in the organization needs to know why we're here, what we're trying to do, and they need to be committed to this 100%. It's because we all understand, we're all committed, and we're all wholeheartedly trying to accomplish the mission. Now, I would say in addition to that, you have to tell the people who are outside, your constituency, or what some would call your public. And so if you have a mission organization, everyone who's supporting it needs to understand what you're trying to accomplish. They need to know what progress you're making, what your needs are, but all of that related to accomplishing your mission and vision. Reports and evaluations then have to relate to that mission and vision. And you will want to have regular reports. We can talk about this more later, but there'll be regular reports that will go to board and to constituency. Now, when it comes to the board itself, there are a number of things you have to think about. First of all, you have to determine who should be on the board. And so the question here becomes one of identifying, cultivating, and recruiting new board members. And that's actually, it's a pretty big job. You always have to be aware of people who can be extremely helpful to you in accomplishing your mission. Over the years, as I have been involved in different organizations, I would say one of the biggest challenges is to get the right people on the board and to get the right mix of people on the board so they work well together, there's good chemistry, and they have the ability to lead the organization in accomplishing its mission as they work with the CEO or the president to do that. Now, how do you identify those board members? Well, you have to know what you're looking for, first of all, but Number one criterion we're saying is they have to believe in the mission and vision of the organization. If they aren't really committed to the mission and vision, they should not be board members. Now, in addition to understanding and being committed, you want people who have the ability to make a significant contribution. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Perhaps you would say they may bring certain strengths or skills to the board that you will need. You may need somebody in finance, you may need somebody in law, you may need someone in marketing or communicating, different skills that you want on the board to help oversee the organization and what it's trying to do. That would be part of the criteria for selecting and then developing board members. They have to demonstrate support of the organization. Now, by that I simply mean this: they have to give money. And if someone is not willing to not only give themselves as volunteers, but give money to this organization, you should not elect them to the board. Have you ever heard the phrase, put your money where your mouth is? That fits. And there are lots of people who will say how much they like something, how supportive they are, but you have to look at what they actually do. Don't listen to what they say until you look at what they do. And if they're not willing to become involved in financially supporting this mission, they should not be on the board. Not everyone agrees with me. There would be people who would disagree. But what you give is a demonstration of where your heart is. I would never be on a board if I wasn't willing to give money. Now, that money has to be related to my ability, and it couldn't be expected to give more than I'm able to give. Someone approached me last year about joining a board. And they knew I liked the organization and I had helped them, and they said, now we require every board member to give $25,000 a year. And I said, well, I'd love to be on your board, I love what you do, but there's no way I can give you $25,000 a year with all the commitments I have. I could give you a portion of that, but I couldn't give $25,000. Well, there are ways in which you have to work to get those things clarified. I'm a little uncomfortable specifying an amount of money that a person has to give. I find myself just not entirely happy with that approach, but I'm extremely happy with saying you need to demonstrate your commitment by actually giving to this organization, and if you're not doing it, you're not yet ready to become a member of the board. And I mentioned the competence in certain areas like finance or law or things like that. Sometimes groups use the 3 W's as a key. That is wisdom, work, and wealth. And they say you must contribute at least 2 of the W's. 3 would be good, but at least 2 are necessary. Maybe you don't have a lot of money, but you can put wisdom and work in. Maybe you can't work, but you can do the wealth and the wisdom. And you would expect some of all 3 to the degree possible, but a significant contribution in at least 2 areas. What about screening and electing those who will become board members? The process includes gathering background information on each prospective board member. In that background information, you not only want to know what other boards they've served on and what has been the nature of their experience or service with that board, but you'd like to know other things about them. What about their business experience? What about their experience in churches, their involvement with any other Christian organizations? When it comes to their life work, perhaps business, what have they done? How good have they been at it? What's their track record? Are they known as very successful people? Even more important, are they known as people of integrity? Does their Christianity come to expression in the work they do? You learn a lot about a person when you learn about their families and you learn about their work and community experience. So you want to do that as well as looking at what other things they've done in terms of board work. You're asking yourself this: what kind of person is this? Because the kind of person you are makes a difference in what you will do for our board. It's not merely that you have money or that you have certain qualifications or that you agree with the mission. We need to know what kind of person you really are. Do you fit us? Will we be happy working with you, and will you be happy working with us? And that becomes very important to ascertain. There's nothing more painful than bringing a person onto a board and then finding they don't like it and they're not a good fit and you don't like them. And then you have to deal with that. And if you have a person on the board who's always complaining and a problem, you've really made a bad mistake. It's good to have someone who keeps you honest. But you don't want to always walk with a rock in your shoe. And so you want to be careful about bringing people on that could be that sort of impediment to your work. Now, what about the president's involvement? Because you're talking about a board that is responsible for governing an institution and responsible for overseeing the work of the president. So what should he be expected to do in terms of the process of identifying, selecting, cultivating potential board members? You could probably say that his role is absolutely essential. I don't see how you would want to have a process of selecting board members without some involvement and significant involvement by the president. Most important decision boards make is the selection of your chief executive officer, the person responsible for running it, and the board needs to be able to relate to that person. And every new board member coming in is going to expect to get to know that president, work with him closely, perhaps have a friendship with that person. So early on, as people are identified who might be potential board members, you would think the president is going to be a key contact person and liaison for the institution with that potential board member. It would be discussed with the board chair and with the board or a committee of the board that's responsible for this, but typically the president is going to be the key person in working this relationship with everyone. The board chair gets involved in, and there is a discussion of that person's potential involvement. And at that point, it's helpful to get acquainted. You can have the person visit a typical board meeting as well as have private meeting with the president and the board chair. You can have the phone calls and all, but as you get to the point of saying, we're ready to take a formal step toward bringing you on our board, you bring them to a meeting and you let them meet everyone, you let them see how the board functions. They have an opportunity to see and know everything before a final decision is made. So you're able to see if you think they're a good fit. They're able to see how you operate. They know who you are, and decide if they feel really comfortable doing that. And it comes down to that final decision, having done all the homework and the relationship building. Now, along the way, you might arrange a visit with another board member, and sometimes it's a board member who knows them. And so they can sit and talk with them, or after the president, the chairman talk to the person, maybe there's a phone call, then a board member who lives close by could possibly go and talk about board membership and what's involved with that. All of that is to say, you want to be very careful, extremely careful, in thinking about who qualifies to be on this board. And take your time in being sure they really fit. Because once you make the decision, you have to live with that for a while, even if it's uncomfortable. And it gives them time to do the same thing. What about the president's role with the chair? You have all of these board members, they're all expecting things of the president and know their responsibilities on the board. And the president's expected to work with the whole board and have ways of communicating and bringing them in decision-making processes. What is the role of the chair in that? You would say, well, because that person is the chair, they have a primary responsibility for giving direction to the board. And you expect the president to work very carefully with the board chair. So, if there is anything at all that would not be good news, you're happy to give good news to all the board, but sometimes there's news that isn't so good. And if that news comes along, you want to be sure that the chair knows it and that you are able to discuss it and discuss how you will move forward together. My one rule was I never wanted the chairman to hear bad news from anybody or any source before he heard it from me. I was never afraid to give it. I didn't like to give it, but I was never afraid to give it. And I knew I had to give it. That means there is a good flow of information between the president and the chair, and the relationship is one not only of a full disclosure of information, but it's of a high level of trust. And ultimately, you have to build trust on the board. And the president's work is critical to doing that. Now, you can say the work of the chair is too, because is there a way in which he is not honest with the president, or talks to others and plans actions around the president and the president gets surprised? Well, that wouldn't be healthy either. But we can say in terms of what the president does and the behavior of the board, there has to be a free and timely flow of information so that everybody has the information they need to be able to make decisions and to minimize downturns. What about the president and other board members? What about the president and external relations? Well, you would think that if the president is going to be subordinate to the board, report to the board and work with the board and work for the board, one thing he wants to do is keep the board happy with his work and with him personally. Now, part of that is doing your work well and giving regular and timely reports or good flow of information to the board. But the other side of it that you may not often think of is, what do you do to build a good, healthy relationship with board members? And that involves developing very close ties. You might say there's a strong social dimension. I was with Hendrick this week in a couple of discussions, and one of the things he mentioned is when they have a board meeting, they begin with a dinner. And part of the reason you begin with a dinner is you realize just how important it is for people to spend the time together and develop close relationships. And it's out of this that good communication and trust comes. So, for a president, he has to make it a priority to spend time with board members. And I think that means calling them on the phone and talking. It means sending reports out to them, but it also means going to visit the board members in their own locations and them seeing him caring enough to be where they are and getting to know their family. Once you do that, you're developing the potential for a kind of cohesiveness on the board that becomes very powerful, especially when you encounter problems. I'd say it's good to plan and organize social gatherings for the board, not only dinners, but other things, including spouses. I found there are a number of times when you have special occasions, the spouses could come, and they were an inside part of everything, and it changed their attitude. They began to think very differently about everything. So, all of these are a part of it. Now, once in a while, there will be a board member that is a little different from the others, and the chair may be happy with that person, but the president finds it difficult to work with them. And for some reason, they may not like the president as much as they thought originally. I've been on boards where after a short period of time, a board member would start raising questions about things, and by the questions was indicating some uncertainty and maybe disapproval in some way. Well, what do you do about that? There are other board members who can be very helpful. If you have good cohesiveness, those board members can be helpful in solving that and working with that person to smooth things over and to make things go forward nicely. But if not, the president has to work with that person and try to resolve the issue. And if he cannot do that, he has to discuss that with the board chair. And they have to ascertain what is the nature of this situation, what's causing the problem, and how do you resolve it. The person may have a legitimate concern. I was on a board recently where I happened to be the chair, and we had a board member who tended to be a pain in the neck. And so he was always raising a problem or criticizing publicly, and you thought to yourself, he should know better than to criticize publicly like this. If he's got a problem, let him come to the president privately, let him come to me privately, let's work it out, let's go to the right committee. But just to tell everybody this blanket criticism is creating some issues. So I simply went to the person and I said, I don't know your experience, but mine has been if you have a problem, we would like to deal with it. We don't want to dodge problems. But we need to deal with problems privately. And if we cannot resolve them privately, then we'll go to the larger group and find resolution. I have a problem with you criticizing the president in front of all the board members, and you didn't even talk to him privately. And you didn't talk to me privately. That's not good board behavior. Now, I didn't like to have that conversation, and I postponed it to see if the person would change, but he didn't. Now, what if I had not taken that step? Then I'm encouraging more of the same, and we could be moving toward a problem in the board where you move people toward sides and divisions, and then you get a serious issue. The best thing to do is say, we have to work together. If there is an issue, let's talk about it, but there's an appropriate way to bring it up and talk through it. And we'll follow protocol in doing it that way. And so the president's responsible to do that, and the chair is responsible to do that, to be sure that things work out well. And if you don't control those issues early on, they get bigger, typically. What about when you have new board members and they're coming to their first meeting or really getting into the flow of their responsibilities? Then we talk about orientations. An orientation is the effort you make to educate and inform that person about the organization as completely as you can, so that they understand not only your mission and vision, but they understand how you operate. They know what the expectations are of them and of others who work. And someone has to make the effort to be sure that people are appropriately educated about their responsibilities and activities as board members. You're supposed to be at every board meeting. You're supposed to do the reports, be on the committees. Here are the other things we want. You go through all of that. A formal orientation will follow as soon as possible after that person is elected, but I would think that before you move to formal orientation, as you've been talking to a person about becoming a member of a board, you're explaining a whole lot about the organization and how it works, and they should know a tremendous amount before. But by the time they are elected, there's some things they don't know. You'll want to review policy manuals. You want to introduce them to key people in the organization who can talk about how they do their work, and they get acquainted with those individuals. They see all that's going on that way. Well, who does the orientation? Seems to me the president has the primary role to do it. Now the chair could, and that would not be a problem if the chair and the president work together, but typically it's a president. The CEO does the orientation. He's responsible for arranging and coordinating everything. And the chair can participate as is appropriate and helpful, and the chair would be present. You would introduce key staff who explain their areas of responsibility, and they get a better idea of what each of the key people are doing in their areas of responsibility, and they begin to feel like they know them and they can talk to them. And so they're more comfortable with everything that's happening and who's doing it and how it works. And then you come back around and you say, now, here's the way we do everything, and here's who does this area, here's who does this area. And we just want to remind you of what we're expecting you to do in your area. And if you don't come back, especially after the person's elected, very soon after they're elected, have a good conversation with them, ask them how they like the meeting, but remind them of what your expectations are, and then stick with that. Now, there's a way in which you can connect them to other board members who are very compatible. If that hasn't already occurred, I would be thinking about doing that. So they build some friendships with other board members, and that'll be a big help. You want to determine if there's any additional encouragement or information that may be needed. But let's say you have an organizational chart, and here you have the chairman, the board, you have the CEO, other staff on down the line, what have you. There's some people who would say, well, everyone on the board has a vote, including the chairman. I know a chairman who says, we have 25 votes on the board, but only one vote counts. That's the deference pyramid. That is, there are people on boards, and very often chairmen, not necessarily, but very often, if they've been there a long time, if they tend to be powerful people, then they have an unusual amount of influence. And so if they take a position, that usually settles it. Because otherwise the board has to remove the chair. You see? And so there are all kinds of dynamics in organizations you have to think about. And if you're new to these experiences, you can make mistakes. And then you learn painfully from them. But I would say here, what we're really looking at is trying to get a group of people on a board to be responsible for governing it, and do it so that, one, they love the mission and vision and the institution, they're committed to it, but they fit, they work well together. And they work well with the chairman and the president. And it's a cohesive group. It's like a team. And that's so important for the health of the organization. If you have a dysfunctional board, it will lead to a dysfunctional organization. And you'll suffer. You'll have your problems. And so the important thing is to be ever so careful in building a strong board. When reports are given to board members, I have been on boards where you get so much information you can't tell what's most important and really useful. It seems to me the president has a responsibility to give reports on important and necessary items, to try to have a standard way of reporting that, and to do, or a standard format, and then to give them what they need to function effectively. You might, as a president, even say, here are action items, and here's the information you need for these. Here's some other information if you're interested. But you have to have a way to sort this out. And the temptation is to feel a bit of self-importance and overwhelm people with what you send to them. The board has to be involved in strategic planning as well. Because if you're talking about the mission and vision, you're talking about its implementation. And so the board, not every member of the board in the same way, but the board itself needs to be involved in the strategic planning process of the institution. It should approve the process, and it should approve the plan. The plan then would be implemented through the president, who then keeps giving those periodic reports and provides for a review. The other thing that's very helpful is to arrange for evaluations that are designed to help people think about themselves and their performance for the purpose of improvement. Evaluations can be done in such a way they're not helpful, and they can be more painful than they need to be. But if people have a way of receiving evaluations that enable them to understand how they are really helping and areas in which they can improve, and they're given encouragement about that, can be very beneficial. The board needs to evaluate itself, and the board needs to evaluate the president. Not every board will do that. Then, what about the staff? We can quickly work through some of this and give you more time for questions. You have the whole matter of selecting and orienting your staff, similar to what you do with the board. You want to identify those who are committed to the mission and vision, as well as having the required qualifications for the job. That's important. And you want to give them an orientation to the institution so they really understand, don't misunderstand who you are, what you're trying to do, and how well they might fit. The thing I'm not mentioning in here that I think can be very helpful is when a person is being hired, it's important to do more than look at a person's credentials or expertise. You look at their background, their work experience, you talk to people who've worked with them, and you find out as much about them as you can. It's one thing to interview the person and let them visit the organization. My experience has been it's far better to bring that person in, let them see how the organization works, let them go around and meet different people, but then involve them in various kinds of social experiences. So you have someone they wouldn't be working with, go to lunch with them, maybe a couple people. Somebody else takes them to dinner. And so they're visiting with different people while they're looking at the job, and they may think everything is related to their qualifications to do this job, do it well, and how they've done it elsewhere, but you want to discover more than that. And so you want to find out what kind of person they are. How do they fit with do they get along with the other people? I used to do this in hiring faculty, and so we would do all the checking, every kind of thorough checking you could do. We would have the person come to the campus, meet the faculty, give a lecture to students, but I discovered some of the most important part of the process, apart from background check with other people who knew them, was to get them around in different kinds of settings in our institution. Let them go to dinner with people, let them go to lunch with, and they would just think they were visiting, for the most part, having a good time, and that we were trying to show hospitality. And then we would pull every group in that met with them and talk about what we learned, because all kinds of information comes out. And once we learned all that, we had a better idea of whether they were a fit or not. We saved ourselves a lot of trouble. It did not keep us from making mistakes. We still made mistakes, but it minimized them. Once you hire the person, I'm convinced, just like with a board member, if you hire them, it's not only the person they report to that needs to keep checking on them, encouraging them, and giving some coaching or guidance to help them know how to fit better and do their job well, but someone higher up in the organization, maybe the president, needs to talk to the person to whom they report and check on it and see how everything's going. And maybe go by and meet the person, give them a word of encouragement, show you're interested, you care for them, and that can make a difference. And you do the same with a social gathering. With a staff, it is important to keep everybody informed. I've been a part of organizations where we were not kept very well informed. We worked in our areas, we talked to each other, but a lot of things happen we didn't know, we get surprised. You want to try to avoid that. And in an organization, the things people need to know, you want to find a way of giving that information to them. Maybe you have regular staff meetings to do it. Maybe you have other ways of getting the information out, but you want to do that. And they need to know if you're facing problems so they can help. Sometimes they can come up with solutions. And if you involve your people with you, it can make a huge difference. You let them know what's contributing to the progress and what's hindering the organization. Praise those who do well or the groups that do well, and you address your problems individually. As they say, praise publicly and criticize privately. But you run into other things. For example, I remember once we were attempting to think about space allocation in a building because we were growing. So the question is, how do we use a space as efficiently as possible? And I gave someone a responsibility for doing it. And then we told everybody in the building, we said, here's what's happening. And we want to take a look to see that we're using our space as efficiently and effectively as possible. And we may have to make some changes. So if you have a suggestion, let us have it, because we're going to have to make a decision. And you may know something we don't know that really helps. Well, there was one woman on the staff who said, you don't listen to whatever we say anyway, you know. And I thought, oh my goodness. I said, well, her name was Betty. I said, Betty, we may not do as well as we should, but I can tell you, if you have an idea you think we need to know, give it to us. I'll promise you right now that we'll listen to what everybody says. We may not do what everybody says, but we'll listen. Well, she turned in a suggestion. Turned out to be a really good one, and we did it. And she was a different person from that time on. Her whole attitude changed. That's the kind of thing I'm thinking about. Because in organizations, people get set in certain ways of doing and certain ways of thinking. And there are all kinds of things you can come back to do to get them more highly motivated, to give them a sense of ownership, a sense of satisfaction when things go better or when accomplishments occur. And when good things happen, everybody can share in the celebration together. So the healthy institutional culture that you're looking for then is only going to occur when there is enthusiastic commitment to the mission and vision, when the values align with the practice. And I simply mean this. You can say there are certain things that are important to you. The question is that the way you behave? Your educational institutions talk about the hidden curriculum. That is, you say, this is what we're teaching everybody, this is what we stand for. But then you look at the way everybody behaves or how they do things, and you find out what's really important. And so in an organization, you want to be healthy, you say, okay, how do we really operate? How do we treat people? How do we make decisions? This is critical. And sometimes you have to clarify those values as you go. And this is the way you build trust. See, if people know that I will tell them the truth, that I will keep my promises, that I have an idea of where the organization needs to go, and if we work together, we can accomplish that. It's amazing what that does. And that's what you want as you not only build trust, help people know what to expect, but so that you give a sense of real hope to that organization. Now, strong relationships have to be a priority. You've got to care for each other, you've got to love each other, and if you don't do that, then it's perfunctory. So you're building strong relationships, especially those who work most closely together. Get the staff to know the board members, hear about their backgrounds, because we're all people. And it's a realization, we're people. We get to know each other. And the president will spend time walking around and visiting, as well as in meetings with staff. I'm a person who hates meetings. You have to have some. But I found it was far more helpful for me to go and talk to people and to go and talk to them where they were doing their work and listen to them and learn and try to be interested and helpful to them. Now, there are times when things go wrong. And when they do, when something bad happens, you want to determine what happened, why it happened, what is the damage, how can it be remedied, what should be changed as a consequence, and are you willing to make the change? So that how will you be different in the future?